Her intro's not dumb.
So I think my favorite thing about getting a stylist to pick my clothes for me is that she doesn't just pick my clothes, she like designs entire outfits and she
I
remembered
know.
what she already sent me. So
It's
she's like,
amazing.
and this would look really good with the shacket I sent you like 2 boxes ago. I was like, well, thank you so much for understanding my entire closet because I would not have put those two things together.
I know. I know. It's so glorious that you have somebody to manage that for you.
Her name is Amber.
We love you, Amber. You're doing a great job.
She's doing a great job. So now I have her on the lookout for my January box for something to wear for Camden, for TEDx Camden.
Hell yeah.
So we'll see. Because it has to have the yellow flats.
Yeah.
But all the dresses I have that go with yellow flats are like summery dresses. And I know Camden in January, it's going to be Balt. So I have to work that out.
That's going to be proper Balts. Yeah.
Proper Balt. So speaking of things that should be proper Balt, outside we have actual winter. Do you guys have winter now?
False. No.
Mm,
It's colder.
okay.
It was like cold yesterday.
Okay.
30. Hi, Jay.
Hey, Jay. Good to see you.
Hi, friend.
Yeah, I think I got in the car this morning at 23.
Ooh.
So, yeah. And yesterday it was too cold to wash cars because we were going to have our friend Omar come and wash all the cars for the employees.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But it was 23 yesterday, so it was too cold to wash cars.
Cool. I mean, I would say gross, but like, shouldn't it be winter now that it's
exactly like that's and now after
technically
like
literally winter now?
2 weeks down like south, I was like, I'm wearing, sandals again in Texas, and I'm like, this is wrong.
Wrong.
Like my soul wants boots. It's time for boots.
I know.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Hi, everybody.
Welcome to December 21st, the first, in fact, day of winter, the winter solstice, where we will be talking not at all about the winter solstice, but we're going to have a really great conversation. I will say the internet here in Philadelphia is having a little bit of a temper tantrum. So if I disappear in the middle of the conversation, that's why. But we're gonna soldier on because we have an incredible guest today. For those of you guys who have been joining us for a long time, Sharyl West Loeung is a dear friend of mine and a dear friend of the Good Doctors. And she's coming back to talk to us about what being on a college campus with COVID is like and giving us an update from the earlier in the semester. But first, we're going to do our ever famous and beloved, at least by us, we hope by you, empathy exercises. So first off, Dr. Aaron, this one is yours. Update on actually some coverage we did once.
Yeah, once in a blue moon. A long time ago, we covered a documentary about the Miami Showband massacre, which is an event in the conflict in Northern Ireland that took place in 1975. Miami Showband was the most famous show band musical group in Ireland at the time, and 3 of their band members were killed in an ambush. But we've been talking a lot about settlements for past wrongs. A couple of the empathy exercises I did on Instagram Live yesterday were about that. So we're delighted to announce that the Miami Showband victims are going to receive 1.5 million pounds in damages, as was announced last week. And the victims have argued that there was collaboration between the loyalist paramilitaries who undertook the violent act and killed the members, and the Ulster and the serving soldiers in the army. So it's a very emotive and one of those kind of incidents from the Troubles that people talk about a lot. It's a great documentary. I think we found it on Netflix. It's like remastered Miami Showband.
Yeah.
And pictured here that Kristen's showing you is Stephen Travers, who has actually endorsed our coverage of.
He has.
he
has.
he retweeted our coverage when we did it a long time ago, and said, like, this is a great conversation about remastered. So we're delighted. I feel like we know Stephen just through how present he's been in this process for advocating for damages and recognition for the survivors of the Showband and the family members of those who were killed. So congratulations to those folks. Hopefully this will help.
Absolutely. So this one's one that I found, but both of us could easily talk about. There's not, unfortunately, a still image here of Philip Adams, but so I can't play the video. But if anyone remembers, it was not years, good Lord, it was a couple decades ago, or also April, depending. There was a former NFL player named Philip Adams who was accused of killing 6 people in Rock Hill, South Carolina. And since doing an autopsy, they have discovered that he had a really advanced CTE. And this is one of those things that here's some of the people that he killed. We talked a little bit about how to possibly reconcile being football fans with knowing that CTE exists when we did our GDD on how to enjoy problematic things. And Aaron talked about hockey. We talked about rugby. Football is not the only thing that can cause CTE, but it is something we should all be aware of. I think one of the things we came down on the side of is that you can't enjoy these things blindly anymore. You have to acknowledge that there's tension here. And not only was Philip Adams, he was guilty of these crimes from everything I've read. There's no way he didn't do this, but we got to have the conversation about, like, if his brain was broken, did he do this? What is,
right.
we don't hold people accountable if they're clinically insane. Do we hold people accountable if their brains are clinically actually broken, which is what CTE largely means? So this is a muddying of the waters of what do we do with CTE, which the NFL has heretofore done a whole lot of work to make sure we don't remember exists. And a whole lot of work to not really do anything with it. Roger Goodell, in particular, has sought to minimize what CTE actually is in his players. And as more and more retired players are seeing the effects of CTE, I am afraid we're going to hear more stories like this. So this is just a little bit of a somber reminder, especially for those of us who like college football, and we're about to go into bowl season, and we're going to be watching 18-year-olds, doing this. It's hard. It's really hard, and also sick 'em Bears. So
hail to Pitt. Hail to Pitt.
Sick 'em Bears win the Sugar Bowl, but it's messy, and this is a great reminder of why it's messy. And I can imagine that the families don't feel like this is any sort of justification for what he did, but I also wonder how they're now wrestling with an injured man injuring their family, which is an added complication. Too often you just want things to be very black and white, and this one isn't. So
very few things are. Aside from joining Elle's newsletter, this one is me, and I'm just gonna highlight this because it's a quite a long profile of Indigenous model Quannah Chasinghorse. And she first came into kind of the Twitter news at the Met Gala, because the Met Gala, like, I forget what their theme was, but it was like American, like, culture or something, like American classics or something weird and vaguely racist. And she, is a gorgeous and stunning human person who is a model, and she was there and highlighting Indigenous artists, which she does a lot. She is Han Gwichin, I butchered that and I apologize, and Sikangwa Oglala Lakota, and is very, very active in the world about her indigeneity and advocating for representation. So please read this profile. There's some gorgeous pictures in here. It's written by Therese Marie Mailhot, who is a First Nations author of one of my favorite books, Heartberries. So well written. She's a land protector, an activist, and champions Native fashion and design all the time in her work. So really exciting to see her on the cover of Elle, and it's a great story, so read it.
I love too that like so very often we're told that tribal tattoos will hold people back.
Yeah.
And here is Quannah like proudly displaying all of her tribal tattoos. So that's a fun moment for me. For those on the podcast, obviously this will be linked in the show notes. And please just at least scroll through the Elle article if you don't believe in reading right now, which is fine. All of our brains are dead. But the visuals are fantastic. And this is another both update on something we've covered and something that Dr. Aaron brought us.
Yeah. So on our deep dive into institutional abuse, which, you know, we've found that bucket for all our friends and neighbors out there. We've covered the scandal and horror and trauma of the mother and baby homes in Ireland. So we won't get into what it was. You can, you know, we've got the resource list. You can check back on our footage to learn more about it. But very recently, this year, there was a commission report released. So the Irish government had commissioned the Mother and Baby Homes Commission of Investigation to look into how victims and survivors were treated and what kind of recompense there needed to be, etc. And it didn't go well. It was received very, very poorly.
It was botched.
It was absolutely botched. Victims and survivors were treated terribly. And so the news from the Clan Project, which we'll have the link for you with the whole report in it, was that an Irish High Court declared that the Mother and Baby Homes Commission treated survivors unlawfully. So this was a lot to do with how they got information from the survivors, how they treated that information in the report. There's a whole backstory to it that we don't necessarily need. But, you know, oftentimes in our empathy exercises, we talk about the importance of holding institutions accountable and utilizing the justice system when we can and when it works to do so. This week and tomorrow or Thursday in our coverage of Dope Sick, we'll be talking about how the federal court system is currently right now sort of helping with the bankruptcy case for Purdue Pharma. So we like to highlight these when we can. And this is an exciting update, and I'm delighted for the victims and survivors that they're getting this recognition, and hopefully the Irish courts will also adjudicate fixing
properly.
This.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know of a better way to spend Christmas Eve than with us talking about Dope Sick. So definitely make sure to come back and
Nothing but sunshine and rainbows. Speaking of sunshine and rainbows, I came across this report, I think probably from Indian Twitter, because that's usually where I get my things these days. But this is a fascinating article on kind of the stats behind representation and what it means. And this picture here is from Reservation Dogs, which if you haven't seen it on Hulu, like go watch it right now. But, you know, we've got all of these, whether they're new series like Reservation Dogs or Rutherford Falls, or like reboots with diverse casts of Wonder Years and Gossip Girl and all this kind of stuff. They broke it down. Yes. And I think this is really, that graph was so interesting of like what the breakdown, for listeners at home, obviously on the podcast, you'll get this link, but there's a share of screen for identity groups. And the breakdown of what it looks like on broadcast and cable and on demand and stuff like that. So things are better, but they're not great. And we've got a lot more work to do in all of these facets. So, you know, we like, as qualitative researchers, we love the stories behind the numbers, but it's helpful to have the numbers sometimes to then be able to facilitate deeper conversations about what representation means. And we do that all the time. We love to highlight when we have stories about representation to share with people. But we definitely also need to say, like, you have to go beyond just casting Black folks or casting Indigenous folks or, you know, having one show.
Yeah. And I want to note here that it says that these stats are for people among the top 10 recurring cast members. Yeah. So that's an important stat. especially when it comes to Native representation.
Right.
Because pretty much they're only in the top 10 recurring cast on Reservation Dogs and Rutherford
And
Falls.
Rutherford Falls. Yeah.
Pretty much it.
That's all there is. Yeah. So check it out. It's a really interesting read and some food for thought as we move into the next, the end of this television season and kind of 2022 and what we can get even under the COVID delays.
So finally, Dr. Aaron brought this, but like I'm just going to cover it really quick because this is so much fun.
Please do.
As the resident genetic Scottish person. So Scottish witches, of which there are still many, BT dubs. It's a big part of still Scottish pagan tradition. They were executed for causing hangovers and turning people into owls, which I mean, valid. There's several people I would like to turn into owls, so I don't really care. Those accused of being witches under the Witchcraft Act that was between 1563 and 1738 are going to have their names cleared. Very legitimately. About 4,000 people were accused. Over half were executed. And this seems silly, but it's also a massively big deal. Because for some of these people, that means that they haven't necessarily, like their families haven't been able to have, certain rights restored to them, or they haven't been able to access records of their families, or they've been, mocked, made fun of, maligned, whatever. So it's not like a small thing. Also, it just, witches are never as scary as we wanted to make them out to be, whether they have connection to the natural world and powers or not. It was usually just cranky women that were problematic that we decided to burn. So I'll be looking for this from the government of Massachusetts, and I'm sure I'll be holding my breath for it.
Heyo.
But the Great Scottish Witch Hunt is also, if you're a history nerd like I am, a really fun rabbit hole to fall down, of the specificities of why it happened in Scotland, and the role of the church in it, and the Presbyterian Church, which is what it was at the time, and what that kind of all looks like, and specifically around the Isle of Fife. So for funsies, hang out with Scottish witches for a little while because they're about to be exonerated.
I know, and I just thought that was so cool because it's a way for us to talk about some of the ideas that we talk about all the time, like misogyny and the patriarchy and all of that. And when we say like it's been baked into the culture for a long time, like these women were, many of them, broke against societal norms.
Yeah.
And that could, some women might have had connections and called themselves witches. Some women might have read books.
Yeah.
Which,
yeah.
Or not wanted to get married.
Yeah, there's that fun meme that goes around sometimes of like all the things that women were put in jail for in Victorian times, and like what like on that list is always reading a novel.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh well, shit, that would go poorly for me. So pretty much any women trying to change the world, we've always been eviled or maligned in some way. And speaking of women who are changing the world, we'd love to now welcome our friend Sharyl to the stream. Sharyl, welcome so much.
Man, what an intro.
Goodness I know. Gracious. I knew she was, as soon as she started, I was like, that's going to be her transition. And
I mean, that's a transition. Excellent empathy exercises, friends.
Oh, thanks so much. Thanks.
Love it.
So would you mind reminding our listeners and viewers who you are and why you're here, and then we'll get going.
Yeah, I mean, after that intro, that like puts a little pressure on to say something, right? Well, yes, so I am a higher ed professional. I work in student affairs specifically, and I'm on a college campus, mid-sized college campus, but this last 6 months, I can't believe it's been 6 months, I've been working with a grant program. I've had a grant to work with college students, undergraduate and graduate students. I've had a cohort of 20, and we've been working to bring really vaccinations, simply put, to our college campus and our community. So the easiest way to put it is that we were charged with decreasing misinformation and hesitancy and increasing education acceptance of the COVID-19 vaccination.
And the grant was specifically for faith-based institutions?
No, it wasn't, but it was from the Interfaith Youth Corps. And so what they did was so they work specifically with higher education institutions, as just what their foundation does. And so they were giving the grant to college campuses. And their thought was, after they did their initial research, what they found was that faith-based entities had the most influence in their communities when there was hesitancy around like religion. Okay, put it this way. So we knew that a lot of the people who were hesitant were claiming some sort of religious reasoning.
Okay.
So whether it were fetal tissue, whether it was just issues with political alignment that also happen to have religious ties with our evangelicals, there are a lot of different things. So what they found in their research was that when someone in a faith community, not just Christian, any faith community, so clergy, did something that was pro-vaccine, so they could, from the pulpit, say something, they could use their building for testing even, that there is a 26% increase in likelihood of those who were there to, if they were regular attendees, to say, I'm interested in the vaccine, I would be vaccinated. Those who were like attended, say like once a month, it was actually closer to a 40% bump, which I still don't understand. But yeah, so that's I can send you for the show notes, the PRRI study. And so they did one in April, one in June. And what happened between April and June was they found that hesitancy decreased, but the vaccination rates did not increase. And so then they started looking at issues of access, so that there were legitimate issues of access that were still occurring in areas, because hesitancy decreased quite a bit without the vaccination rates increasing. And so we were asked mid-grant cycle to shift away from our like education initiatives and go straight towards clinics, getting vaccines out. So we initially had started as a campus-only initiative. And so we were only working towards dealing with misinformation, getting students to look at getting into the health clinic, that sort of thing. But because access wasn't really their issue, since we have vaccinations here, we completely redirected, scrapped all of our plans and moved into the community and started working on bringing together basically different faith entities within the community to work together in places that we knew the community had not seen clinics happening.
Okay.
So for us, one of our first stops was our metropolitan community church, which is historically is a church. If you don't know much about the denomination, is actually, you would just call it like a gay church, but literally that's why it was made. It came out of the AIDS crisis. And so we partnered with the pastor there with the HIV food pantry. And so we were able to do clinics at the same time as the food pantry. And the other thing that he was running at the same time was also the unhoused population, just because of where he was located. He does these little, the little houses that they look like bird houses for books. Yeah. He has those around, but they're non-perishable food items. And so a lot of people that just kind of tent cities around that area. And so we were able to put out flyers and work in that area for vaccine clinics. And so all we would do is call the health district and say, hey, we want to do a clinic in this area. And so we did multiple clinics, just really working with that group.
So, I mean, this is getting students into a lot of populations that they may not have ever encountered. Mm-hmm. So what was working with the students in this process like? I know it's a very broad question, but we met some of them who were all rock stars, but they hadn't really embarked on the clinics yet as much. So what was that process like?
I had some hesitancy myself in telling them, because we had them, I had a large cohort, as large as I could have. And I went for as many as I could get. And So they were broken up into teams. And so one of the teams was social media and education. And so they'd been working really hard on their like TikTok campaign, all these videos. And so you have to go to that team and say, hey, all the things you've been planning and all the stuff you've done with your peers, it's great, but that's not what we're doing anymore. I felt, I was just bummed to tell them that. I mean, I don't know what else to say, but they were so great about shifting, and they decided to keep doing it anyway. And just as we still want to reach our peers, and so we can do that on top of. And so I ended up applying for an additional grant. I got an invitation to apply for some additional funds. And so we were accepted into like an extension grant. So we were able to do some extra work on top of what we were already doing. And so they continued to run their podcast. They continued to do education on, hey, there's a new variant. Hey, there's this, there's that, and just kept their Instagram going. But it was a big shift, and it was in the middle of school year. What we'd had been doing was in the summer, and they didn't have a lot going on. But all of a sudden, it was literally right at midterms. Hey, by the way, now I need you to figure out how we're going to run community clinics, and we're going to do some asset mapping. And I mean, it was just a 180. And they jumped in and they did it. I gave them the option to sign on to the basically new term. And I think I got like 18 who said, I want to do the next level, and 2 said, I'm just going to stick to the campus stuff. And so we did that. We did clinics that were focused in another area of town that was more language based, like Spanish speaking. And we partnered with an elementary or a middle school. Once we had the PD Pfizers come out, we worked through that. And so a lot of them were very excited to be able to do the PD Pfizer and to get, be there with the kids when they came through and cheer for them. And so that was really cool. But yeah, one of the cool things that's come out of that as well is so many of those students are also in my interfaith program, Better Together. And our common ground issue is food access or food insecurity. And what has happened is that once they got in this relationship with Charlie, who's the pastor at the MCC, they realized that he's running this pantry by himself. I mean, he gets donations, he gets stuff, but he's really stocking this kind of on like Facebook posts of, hey, I'm empty, somebody stock. And so they now want to take up the project of going and stocking. And so even though the grant's over, I think this partnership is going to continue with the MCC. We actually took them. One of the things I wanted to do was that they wouldn't just do this one-off partnership, but they would get to meet the people who are part of this congregation, that they would get to really get to know the person who's running it. So we did what I called interfaith exchanges. And so they went and attended a service. And so I had, my hijabi and my, atheist students and my fundamentalist Nigerian and my, it was a very diverse group of students. And we went to this just beautiful service, the MCC church, where it happened to be their like anniversary month. And so he was going through like the tenets of the MCC, kind of like what we would call Baptist distinctives, Christian.
Yeah.
But it was that Sunday happened to be on like kind of the origin of the MCC and like why God loves the gays. And it was just the most gorgeous service. And they used YouTube videos instead of like a choir or anything, which I thought would be really hokey. But I mean, they used like a clip from The Greatest Showman. And I mean, everyone was just sobbing. And it was just, and Waco Pride had been the day before out on the Brazos. And so they thought that we had come because we'd been recruited at the Pride table. So the students were like, no, I mean, yeah, I mean, that's cool, but no, that's not us. It was just great. And so then we stayed afterwards, and Charlie, who's just, I mean, he's a friend of mine already, but just shared his story and his just incredible story, and talked to them, wanted to get to know them, and just shared how, he wished more people would come and talk to him, and that everyone's kind of afraid of the gay church, and so the students were like, well, we want to do stuff with you. And so
and your little
now,
educator heart grew 9
I
sizes.
know. And so now, now they want to be part of the food pantry and start doing that, full time. So
and I think what's incredible about that is that something that you and I have been talking about, and then Aaron and I have been talking about, and the planet is talking about, is that we're all really freaking tired. And like, we're all really overwhelmed. And yet we've got this incredible group of students that you're talking about that are like, I'll do more. Like, I would like to curl up in a ball and hibernate forever. But sure, these kids are like, let's partner with a food pantry. Like, it's this really lovely, but at the same time, we've all talked about this, like, they are not okay. Like, college kids are not okay.
Yeah. They care deeply, and they show their care in wanting to take care of others, but no one's taught them how to take care of themselves.
Ooh.
And so, this Gen Z definitely has this global focus that, I don't know that another generation has, but they haven't gotten any self-care education. And so it comes back pretty hard. And so we do see mental health as a huge issue. And I don't want to pin that just on Gen Z, because I think we're seeing that across the board. But yeah, I mean, it's something that has to happen in our education, is what does it mean to give of yourself and also take care of yourself. And they're good at taking care of each other as well, but they can only take care of each other if they know enough to know what they need. And so we would sometimes go through several months and then find out somebody's going through something really substantial. And I mean, you can only share to the point that you feel safe, but at some point, how do you take care of each other when everyone's not okay and no one's saying they're not okay? And so that has been a real challenge. So we ended up doing quite a bit of education. I didn't necessarily plan on this. It certainly wasn't written into the grant. I requested money from IFYC, and we'll talk about this. Hopefully we can be on again and do this, but requested money from IFYC, and they're very gracious to give it to me to do a COVID memorial, because the secondary trauma was so significant, and so many people didn't get to do funerals, go to funerals. Around here, it just didn't feel like anyone was acknowledging that something big had happened. And I think maybe that's true in a lot of places.
Well, yeah, Aaron, I remember you talking about when President Biden did the memorial for whatever terrible milestone we had hit at that point.
Yeah.
How weird that felt, because it was the first time we as a nation had anything.
It's right before the inauguration.
It was right before the inauguration.
Okay.
Yeah, it was last January, I think, and it was like leading up to the inauguration.
We just did another one at the 800,000.
And yeah. I know. I was looking at it today, because it's, we're at 810,000 here in the United States. 5.3 million people in the world.
Yeah.
That we know of. That's
right.
Like recorded.
I mean, yeah.
And it's just like, it's staggering to think about. And, we talk about, obviously, a lot communal trauma here. It's kind of one of our shticks.
Mm-hmm.
And we're the ones that are just screaming, like, we have to start dealing with this. But I think what your point, Sharyl, about mental health, and, we're all exhausted. We're all sad. We're all frustrated. We're all in denial, whatever. We're all in trauma, but, we have, and we'll make sure that this is included in the show notes, because I was just thinking about this as you were talking about it, some new data that shows this generation, Gen Z, disproportionately impacted. Like we're, and this was statistical data which is, as we often say, helpful for us to then ask people questions. But our friends that are quantitative, we're very excited about it. But that's what it shows. And so we'll make sure we have it in the show notes that talks about the trauma that they're going through experiencing this, and the isolation and the impact that it's having on, and Kristen and I talk about this all the time, that their brains aren't fully cooked. So like, I'm struggling to process this. My brain's been cooked for 13 years.
Yeah, and you just have to think of when they were born and what their life has been and what they've lived through, and then what their parents have lived through and thus raised them kind of in that trauma state as well. There's just not a lot of opportunity for them not to have little trauma brains. I mean,
yeah, and I think we can argue that we all have little trauma brains, you know,
Sure.
like, I mean, I think, you know, we can do that. But what I think is really interesting in particular about Gen Z is that they have these little trauma brains. They're also, and they're not fully cooked, God love them. And then they're entirely digital natives. So they have trauma brain, and they have the biggest imposter syndrome that unlike any of us have ever understood. And then we shove them in the middle of a pandemic and tell them to go to college on Zoom. Like, what? Exactly when are these kids supposed to be okay? Like, it's like, when are they supposed to get? So one of the things, and Sharyl, I think I either still have photos of the memorial, or you can share them with me again, and we'll throw them up in the show notes so people can see some of the things. But one of the things I loved, even just the idea that you did a memorial. And I think this is a good line for us to draw. An important part of trauma and trauma recovery is grief. And I think a big part of why all of us have little trauma brains right now is we are all skipping over grief. We're completely just ignoring it. And for some of us, it's because it's undulating trauma, and there's not even a space to breathe and process.
We haven't been able to stop.
We haven't been able to stop. But like what you did, and I think this is a lesson for all of us, to be quite frank, is like, hey, the trauma is still undulating, but we're going to stop and we're going to grieve. And so we're going to complete at least one trauma cycle of the 900 we're a part of right now.
Yeah.
And we're going to put a pin here, and we're going to do it. So talk us through how you worked with the students to make sure it was particularly interfaith. Because I think one of the things, as Americans, we're terrible at grief. We have no box to grieve. And I know I've learned a lot about grief from other religious traditions, specifically Jewish and Hindu, and how they deal with fire. But I know that you worked with some students, and water is a big part of things and some stuff like that. So could you talk us through?
Yeah. So we wanted to represent as many grieving traditions as we could. And my group is incredibly diverse. And so, but they're also thoughtful of even those who weren't in our group. So that was also really helpful. But we had at one of the things that we did was we did two, and they came up with this. It was actually one of my agnostic students came up with it, called it a structured liturgy. So we didn't have a service, we had a structured liturgy. It was pretty short. We ran that twice. And then the rest of the time was like 2 hours. We had these like stations. So it was always moving. So one of the things we wanted to do was that it was very embodied, because we felt like COVID, for those who have survived, represents so much stuckness. And so that there was always movement and a reminder of breath and the ability to be together. And so instead of having, seats that represented like pews, or where you were again stuck in somewhere, that we were at round tables, so that there was sort of this communal feel. You weren't in a church service, you were at a table, even in the structured liturgy. But at the table, we had a missing seat. And so at the seat, we had just a cloth draped over it. Which the missing seat element is a very Jewish concept. And then we ended up using, I actually have one of mine still here because but baby's breath. We landed on baby's breath because we were going to use marigolds. Marigolds make sense for a lot of people in Latin America. It was November 2nd, so it was second night of Dia de las Dia los Muertos, which we had an ofrenda outside because we were doing that too with another group. So it was great. And then my Pakistani students were like, oh, we use those at weddings. Like, ooh, okay,
Ooh.
cool. So, had we not had that, my Muslim students and my like Mexican American Catholic students in the room at the same time to say, oh, that means death for me. Oh, that means like new life for me. We would have really had some issues. So baby's breath's also really cheap. And I had a very small budget. So they were like, that's awesome. It's innocent. It's beautiful. So we went with baby's breath. That's just an example of just being able to sit in a room with people who are very diverse and to have these moments where we all learn something and we're able to do that. Water is really important for a lot of our Asian students. So whether you use like floating lanterns, that sort of thing. My Catholic students really wanted to have candles, and then my Buddhist students, like, we've got to have incense. Like, well, that's easy. So we made sure that we had incense and we did it at the same table. And the Catholic students were like, I don't care. That's fine. There might have been another Catholic student somewhere who was offended by that. I don't know, but that's just how we did it. Cause I had to have a fire extinguisher and a staff member there. So I wasn't going to have two, so there's some things that you just have to kind of mitigate, but, we used, I think my favorite station was, we had called it a tree of life. And we tied, red and yellow is the COVID pin. I don't know if you've seen it. We cut red and yellow ribbons, and the students, it took us several days and many hours to prep this whole event. If you've been on Baylor's campus, Kristen, it was Barfield, all of the quad. I've got lights strung up, so it was lit all through the quad. And so we wrapped trees in like tree wire. And so we had like ribbons. And so for every person that you knew that had died, you could wrap a red or yellow ribbon. And so the tree then became full of red and yellow ribbon. And I got permission to leave it up for the rest of the week. And so even if people weren't there that night, and I left a box of ribbons and this sign out so that people throughout the week could continue to add to it, which took a little finagling, but I was able to do that. And so it just was able to mark for at least a week, like, hey, something really did happen here in our world. And so that was really important to me and special. And then we had a tree that had poetry in it. And the prompt was, some things, I think it was something like, some things take life from us and some things give life. What's giving you life today? And they wrote little poems and were able to clip it from lines. And so it was just this like poems like flinging from the tree, and you could walk through and read. And so it's just all kinds of little things like that. So it's very interactive, very meanxill.
Erin, I'd love to hear, as the material culture specialist, I'd love to hear some of your reactions to everything that Sharyl just said.
Thank you so much for asking me, because I was just going to interject and be like, oh, this is so beautiful. But like, it's the word that you said, right, Sharyl, that's so important, that like embodiment, right? And like the significance to human beings to be able to engage with things physically and materially. And it's so important. It's such a huge part of ritualization in terms of grief. And, we were talking about kind of at parts throughout the pandemic, the lack of the ability to grieve, which is so much about community, but it's also about ritual and tradition and bodily practice and, all of that goes into sitting Shiva or having viewings at the funeral home and all of those processes of grief that have been arrested. But also I loved so much that you had this intentionality of having people move around, because movement has been restricted by COVID, because isolation has become a part of our lives and our lived experiences, and removal from community. But also the idea of having various things that people could do to create, to remember, And we all process things differently, and we learn differently, and we express ourselves differently. So I think I want everyone to adopt what you guys did and like do it on every campus and do it in every town, because
I
it's
could
such
write
a
up a kit. I would be more than willing to. I have
I
all the
mean,
posters. I can put it together. It's all Canva'd out and ready to go.
oh my
God
gosh.
bless Canva.
God
Yeah.
bless Canva. It's such a glorious representation, I think, of the work that you do with your interfaith students. And also I think like what it means to practice empathy every day and to live it. Like you guys were just living it in the meetings that you had and sharing your traditions and trying, living inclusivity and what that looks like. It means you have incense and candles at the same table. It means that you talk to people and say, what traditions are important for you? It means that you have conversations about what flowers are culturally significant, and what they mean and when. And, on a budget with the kind of limitations that you had, in terms of space and time and money, you were able to put together this beautiful commemoration of life. And I would conservatively talk about it for the next like 45 minutes, but I won't. But so much of that I wanted to bring out and highlight is, it can seem really hard to do things now. It can seem too big. 800,000 is a lot.
Yeah.
5.3 million is a lot.
Yeah.
And we're all just trying to like stay above water as well. And but there are things we can do in our communities to make sure that people are seen and heard and valued, and that their lives are seen and heard and valued. And so I just think it's flippin' beautiful what you guys were able to do, and I'm proud to know you.
Thank you. I think what was so important for the students was to have little pockets of agency in their processing of grief. And so the way I work is I really like to empower students in every possible way. And so to give them each, this is your station and you're in charge of this piece. And so for my student who wanted to do the candles, it's like, okay, here's I gave them an invite to the Amazon wish list. Pick out the candles, pick out, the pillows you need, and you're going to be in charge of the station. And I mean, it was windy, and he stayed out there 2 hours relighting, making sure the candles that were lit, the exact same candles, stayed relit. And that was so important to him that and that was his station. And, I sent him the wording because we had, kind of matching directions, I guess you could say, for everyone. It's like, tell me about this wording. How do you want, write this up? Tell me what you think, so that they each, the person on the poetry tree, what do you want the prompt to be? I don't know. Like, you write the prompt. What do you want? And so she's like, came up with a song lyric. Like, this is awesome. This is yours. So just trusting that students, they're grown-ups in so many ways. They've gone through all of this. They can put this stuff together. And I think that, that was so important for them to have a part in that. I've shown, I think, make sure Aaron gets to see it later, but Alex's video, which is really powerful. One of our students who was actually working as a nurse tech in the hospital. And so we had a station where people could just watch his testimony. We had another station, which was podcasts that we've done through the year, but I put minute marks so people could just hear specific pieces. I had another Orthodox student who made I can't remember what it's called, but their dish that they serve for their 30 days of grief. And she just worked really hard and made that dish so that people could eat it and give it away. And so that was hers. And it was, do you have a fridge for me to keep it in? So she had a fridge in my office that she had it in all day. And, so it was just that labor of love that they did. And then I wrote a liturgy that they got moments before, and it was kind of a reader's theater that they did that we can share maybe next time. But
yeah, I'd love to include that. We are, for our listeners and viewers, we are going to have Sharyl and some of the students back at the end of January when their grant cycle is kind of fully done. And we can talk and get some reflections. And I would love to create some time for you guys to walk us through a grieving process,
Okay.
and share the liturgy with us and our viewers, because I think, as we've often said, I mean, I haven't lost anybody in my direct life, and so I haven't felt right, I think, in a way, doing any sort of formal grieving process. But I've lost Christmases, and I've lost weddings, and I've lost time with people I love. And those are things I need to grieve. And I haven't done that. And so I think it's not just the lives. 800,000 is massive, but it's 2 years of losing control and agency.
Yeah.
And I think we all need to grieve that. So I think starting season 3 of COVID, as we're jokingly calling it, with a pause for grief, I think would be a good thing. And we'd love to invite you back to do that.
Sure.
Yeah, for sure. Please.
Yeah.
Thanks for supporting us. They love and adore you both so much. So
the feeling is mutual. So I was sad that the last time I was on campus, they were all gone, because we would love to have been able to feed them in person and hang out. And I'll say, so much of the emotions that you've talked about with your students is things that we see it with our students at Charleston Southern.
Yeah.
And they are, cultures apart, and yet our kids are all really, really similar. So it's important for all of us to remember, college students get maligned a lot.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I know. I was thinking about what you were saying, Cheryl, about how you gave them all tasks and you gave them agency and control, and that was so important. And with our internship, we just give them tasks and they execute it. And people are
Yep.
like, well, how did you get this work out of them? And I was like, well, I told them what I wanted and I gave them the opportunity to do it.
Yeah.
Like they want the opportunity to matter.
Yeah, like there was somebody that was like, well, I mean, who's going to manage this? And I was like, they are. And then we'll step in if it's a crisis. But
Give it to them.
they're going to manage it. I wanted to have that freedom when I was 21, and I kept getting told that I needed supervision, and I didn't.
And especially at a time now where, agency and control, like so much of this we can't control.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so important.
That's absolutely true. And as they come in now, they've had less and less opportunity to do anything independently. And so they need that opportunity to practice doing grown-up stuff.
Yeah. That's a great point. That's one of the things that we work with our team too, is and it also means like answering, text messages like later and being like, so what exactly do we wear for interviews these days? And I was like, well, good news, it's not a pantsuit. So like,
it's true.
It
is better now.
It is better now. I ran out and bought fake pearls, I remember, for my interview, because somebody at the Career Center told me to have them. And I'm like, but it's not me. Like I look back now and I'm like, but I was interviewing with this person and I was not presenting as myself.
Yeah.
Like what?
And I'll never wear them again. So why should I wear them my first day? Yeah.
I didn't even wear pearls to my wedding, folks. Like there's just. So anyway, well, I think we'll hit pause here in deference to the fact that 3 of us do talk and can keep talking. But let's hit pause here and reconvene in the new year and hang out with some more of your students.
Sounds great.
So in the meantime, we'll make sure that there's links to anything Cheryl can publicly provide in the show notes below. And their podcast is incredible, guys, as is the Better Together one that she is a part of as well. And we'll make sure that link is there as well for the show notes as we move forward. And the link to our last conversation as well, so that everybody can get fully caught up. And in the meantime, whatever this holiday needs to look like, our guess is that it will need to at least involve a breath of grief for you, listener and viewer. And we hope you give yourself space to do that, especially as literally plans are changing for all of us minute by minute right now. And so grieve what you need to grieve, cling to the hope you need to cling to. It has been an honor spending pieces of 21 with you, and we look forward to doing it again in 22.